All right, I'm ready. I have my game face on.
As opposed to what other kind of face? I couldn't help myself. I'm sorry.
I almost had it. I was like a swallow away from like defeating that laugh, and I just couldn't do it.
Swallow.
Yeah, you like swallow your pride. You just gulp something. I don't know. Shut the fuck up, Wes.
Yeah, no, I know all about that. That's normal.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're tuning in from across the country and around the world. This is the Life Midwest Podcast. Join us, a washed-up musician, a communications major, and an Army veteran from around the world but raised in the Midwest as we discuss life's current events as well as things current and, well, events. Thanks for tuning in to episode 65, everybody. I'm Kevin Palmer, that's Wes Shirley and Lenny Wells, and today we're going to be doing part one of a two-part discussion into media bias. What is media and what is bias? We'll get into a great discussion today, and then next week we'll be talking about where our own political biases lie, as well as different media outlets and their biases. Wes, I'm going to send it over to you to kick the discussion off this week as we talk about the first part of that. What is media?
A lot of people hear the word media and they probably assume like the news, like they're feeding you lies through the media or whatever. But really, media is anything you consume that's not like food. So like if you see it, if you read it, if you hear it, that's media. So we have like broadcasting, television, radio, things you listen to or watch sent over the air. Publishing, journals, books, newspapers, magazines, print ads, literally anything that's written down or on paper, things for you to view. The internet is media. The internet is convergent media. It's like everything that was media in the past combined together on a single platform. We sometimes call it convergent media. And then
it's like the Megazord of media.
It's when all the media unites into a single crime fighting powers of I don't have anything. We also have social media, which is Web 2.0. So the internet was taking all of our previous forms of media and combining them into one central location. And then we're like, we can talk about all this media and like update each other and stay social with it. So we have Web 2.0 or Convergent Media 2.0 or social media. So we're not just talking about the news when we talk about media. Interestingly enough, all media has a message. If you tell me there's media without a message, I will probably call you a liar. And I think it would be very difficult for you to prove in any capacity that there is media without a message. Do either of you want to try? Just play the devil's advocate.
Okay, so is that to say that there's no like media that is pure entertainment purposes and isn't putting out a message?
Even if it's for entertainment purposes, it has a message. The message doesn't have to be leading in any way. It could be a message on culture. For example, something funny in one culture is not funny in another culture, or may not be funny in another culture. Therefore, you have to understand the message to understand the humor. So when I say all media has a message, I mean there's a meaning behind it. Think of abstract art, and there's still a meaning there. It might not be for everyone, it's a different meaning, but the artist's original intent might be confusion. Let's confuse people. Let's be pretentious and make some money off something I don't understand myself. It can be read, I guess. And without going too deep into like semiotics, which is the study of signs, um, a blank white poster set into a public area still has a message. Apple's used it in the past. It's like purity or clean or whatever.
Yeah, like a cleanliness kind of. Yeah, yeah.
And we did include a video or a quick video on semiotics for reference, because if you're gonna get up to date on media literacy, semiotics, you don't got to go too deep, but it's good to know, I think. It's not always easy to tell what the message is. Sometimes it's far removed from the content itself, the media itself. But there's certainly a message there, and sometimes that message holds a bias. Actually, always the message holds a bias. If someone is making that message, they have their own personal biases or baggage they're bringing along with them. You can think of it in the way one frames a message or the language they use surrounding the point of the message, but it's not always, right in the forefront.
You bring up a really good point, because people write the news, right? People consume the news, but people also are the ones writing the news, and they have their own biases and judgments and kind of associations that they bring to the table when they, are creating said news or scripts or things like that. So even if they don't intend to be biased, they likely are still in some way.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone brings their own biases to pretty much everything they approach in life. From that subjectivity, or rather to that subjectivity, is our past experiences, how we perceive the world, what our brains come to before we produce any type of media, any type of message, any type of content. So those past experiences combined with the way you think brings you to your biases. Kind of.
Is there a way to like reduce bias? Because like if you're not going to get rid of it entirely, is there a way, or are there ways to like to reduce it, or present information in such a way that it is less bias, I guess?
To play the devil's advocate and to also maybe argue a little bit of semantics, I don't think you can ever reduce your bias, but you can be transparent about them. So if your goals are to be as neutral as possible, you have a bias to neutrality. So like your bias level per se doesn't change. Like if you imagine a bar graph, it's like, how biased are you from 1 to 100 or 0 to 100? Your biases kind of just switch. So like you can go politics, for example, left to right, but if you go in the middle, then you have a center bias or whatever. But you can be transparent about your biases, understand your biases, and be open about it. If you're not trying to conceal your biases, if you're at least aware of your biases, that's probably in good practice. I guess the easiest way to look at biases would be to look at the news. And news can be rather tricky.
All right. How so?
Well, what is news? When you think of quote unquote the news, there's a little bit more there than just this happened today and this is what we're talking about. There's opinion pieces. Are the news stations entirely news, or do they have entertainment as well? So like infotainment, is that news? So the reason news can be tricky is because, first of all, what is news? And second of all, the news isn't necessarily just facts. Some news is, there's like the Associated Press, where their whole goal is old-fashioned reporting. It's this happened at this place at this time. You do the rest. But a lot of news includes editorialization, people inserting their opinions or analyses to the event. A good example, think Fox News. Someone says, oh, President Joe Biden did this, this, and this in the White House. And then that same person who's saying that then goes on to insert their opinion about it. Oh, and we all know he takes this many vacations or whatever. Not to, give any specific examples, because I really don't watch quote unquote the news, but I've seen examples like that.
Yeah, and people gravitate towards that, I feel like, too, because they're like, oh, I like his opinions, but and to me that's just like that's almost like confirmation bias in a way, or somebody like looking, or somebody like putting themselves in an echo chamber where it's like, I like them because they regurgitate my ideas back at me. And that could be kind of dangerous. But the other thing I want to touch on that you mentioned is, with the opinion pieces thing, is that sometimes the news can be tricky because, sometimes people get the news from fucking late night talk shows, because they talk about things that have happened and then make jokes about them, and usually those jokes are liberal leaning or poking fun at the GOP, etc. But a lot of people prefer their news that way these days, or some consume their news that way, and I think that's also like confirmation bias in a way, right? But talking about how most news companies have some sort of an agenda, not only for their own interests but for the interests of corporate shareholders and partners. The agenda could be anything from captivating their audience to watch more and more of their content and increase ratings to point to some sort of everything from monetary gain or fear mongering against their competition's interests for the benefit of their allies. It's not to say that there are any news companies whose only interest is sharing the news with the public. They're a small minority now, right?
But I don't know that there is even a small minority. I just don't think it exists. I don't really think that it's ever existed, honestly.
There's been definitely history's had its share of propagandists, and we had yellow journalism, at the turn of the night or the 20th century, turn of the 21st century. Wait, no, we're in the 21st century. At the turn of the 20th century, they had to outlaw that shit. Like you just can't. I think we're revisiting dark times as far as that goes. I think they've laxed on regulation because everything is now infotainment. Like, oh, it has the news logo, but it's an opinion piece. So we masquerade as the news and people believe it's the news, but we're not actually the news. Whereas in the past it was newspapers like, yo, this actually happened. But it didn't.
I think part of the problem also goes into just the internet in general, and it's something that might need its own episode, but we can kind of dance around it for now. In so much as that what would be quote unquote news is being hosted rather than like being direct sources. So when you're talking about like yellow journalism and journalistic integrity at the like during like the 20s and things like that, that really came about because they were going into like print media, right, where that would then get nationally circulated. Whereas if you have somebody that's like a host, like Facebook and Twitter and social media are getting in trouble with this, with governments all over the world, is that they're the platform that anybody can post whatever they want, right? So if like just take Twitter for example, let's say Joe Biden does X, Y, and Z, and then a person like a verified Twitter person goes and says, "Hey, Joe Biden did this. Look how he's like such a piece of shit," and then that just confirm goes on to confirm somebody else's bias, or and then down the rabbit hole it goes. But or if they're like spreading quote unquote what we call fake news now, or like conspiracy theories, it's not that like it's that the bias is still there, and like the what we would call now yellow journalism and how it has been outlawed isn't so much, it can't be as regulated because it's being shared in places where those laws don't necessarily cover.
Definitely.
So like there's a I think in the EU right now, social media companies are they're trying to hold social media companies liable for try to hold them responsible for the content that users generate on their platforms. So like if somebody's like spreading vaccine misinformation, for example, since that's pretty still relatively topical, then for as long as it remains to be like posted, um, then the social media companies themselves can be left open for lawsuits or governmental oversight action.
I think regulation of the internet definitely needs to be its own episode because it's just such a vast topic. And I don't think there's a right answer for that. I don't know if either of you have one, but like, what do we make social media sites public? Like the state takes control of them and then monitors them, or like CEOs and shareholders own these social media websites, and they're literally just a posting board. Like no one in control of Reddit gets in trouble when like someone posts misinformation on Reddit. The mods are supposed to take care of it, but that's like community led, and there's just so many things. Like the internet would have to be regulated before that would even make sense, at least in the US. I don't know how the EU works, and I'm sure they're going to do it just fine because they generally do compared to us. But I would not even know how to start tackling that.
Well, I just meant to bring it up as like as like a comparison, right? Because like into like how you were like talking about like journalistic integrity basically, and the I feel like I may have just derailed the conversation, so sorry.
No, it's a valid point for sure. Like what you brought up is outside of the research I did, which is why I don't have anything to give to it, but it's definitely a valid part of this episode, I feel.
Yeah, I think that plays into fact checking media, because the internet is just so vast, and I've said this before. I said this in a very early episode, but the internet can do whatever the fuck it wants, and it's very very hard and tough to regulate. And I think we could do an entire episode on it if listeners wanted to, and I'm happy to do it if you do. But it's just, yeah, it's such a vast topic that would take an entire episode to cover at least. But I mean that does bring into the point of like, I think in a way you can kind of talk about like confirmation bias in media with that, because it is difficult to get like a quote unquote true depiction of media bias from outside sources, especially if you find them on the internet. But again, these are people with their own biases writing the story on other people's biases. So for example, if I believe that Fox News to be is truly conservative and fail to acknowledge their far upright authoritarian narratives, my analysis of their origination or their organization holds my confirmation bias that Fox News is conservative. Alternatively, if I hold super left-leaning beliefs, I may put an organization that tries to remain neutral in the right bias category, as they are far removed from my beliefs. There do exist media bias watchdog groups, which can be found in the links below. We'll have in the podcast description, but it is best to view them as an opinion, as they have their own criticisms and agendas, just like all media does. Like, right, we just covered that. So, I mean, this is why even though there are plenty of online resources to tell you about media biases, it's still best to understand media bias yourself and decide based on your values and beliefs where media lands on your political spectrum. So I think, again, talking about tying into what you're saying, Lenny, about the internet and getting your news off of it and something, getting your news off of such an unregulated platform. Again, it's a slippery slope. It's a tough cookie to crack. Would love to do an episode on it, but there's also I want to put a link in here in the podcast description at politicalcompass.org. You should take that test. Just kind of see where your ideas land. You might surprise yourself.
Yeah, if you want to, I wanted to do a little discussion about that, because that knowing where your biases lay is where that's how you're able to know, like, all right, I'm watching this. I have these beliefs of X, Y, and Z. I'm going to pit my beliefs against what that person's saying, and I might surprise myself. I might go towards them. I might fall away from them. At the very least, I know where I stand, and then I can, not like it's a battle, but more like, but yeah, once you know your biases, it's easier to kind of discern other people's biases. You might be arguing in circles with the person on the television, not understanding you think the same thing, maybe. I don't know. Generalizing.
A bit of a shorter episode this week, but the discussion was just too good to cut it down to only one episode. Hey, we'll return next week with the remainder of the conversation as we discuss our results of the political compass, as well as major news outlets and where they land on the left to right leaning spectrum. Until then, if you're looking for ways to support us, you can interact with us at any of our major social media platforms, including TikTok now at The Life Midwest. We also have a website at thelifemidwest.com. You can also email us at support@thelifemidwest.com, and we will read your email on the air if you, unless you don't want us to for some reason, then we won't. If you're looking for other ways to support us, you can leave us a review on your favorite listening platform. That helps us out immensely. It gets us noticed by other people who don't normally listen to us, so we that. And then, of course, we also have PayPal set up for donations, as it does cost money to run the show at paypal.me/thelifemidwest. We'll be back next week with part 2 of the discussion, and we hope you'll join us next Saturday and every Saturday here on the Life Midwest podcast. Take care, call your mom, and have a good one.